This is a 749S, one of the 6mm valve stems with tapered collets engines, which I think is one of the most stupid things they ever did, particularly for a road bike. In terms of a road bike, they just make the valve clearances incredibly hard to do. You're meant to pull the heads off. What I usually do is leave the heads on, but pull all the side plates off, the sides here. And the reason you pull the side plates off is so you can get the opening rockers and their pins, which are in here, out. Because realistically you need to get the opening rockers out of the way to be able to access the closing shims. On this, you'll see here, that's the end of the pin. That pin comes out far enough with the engine in the frame to just get the rocker out. And it's about, you know, a millimetre, or within a millimetre of being not enough. These rocker pins, when you're trying to get them out, the thread in here is M7, so you need a special M7 bolt or something to actually get them, although usually they will come out with a bit of a push. You can hook something in that tiny little groove there and pop it out. That's what I did to get that one out. Usually they come out relatively easily. So they really weren't designed to be done unless you pulled the heads off. And the idea is you pull the heads off, you put the head on a plastic block that is machined with the valve head shapes, and then you put a tool on here and you belt the shims off. What I do is I pressurise the cylinder so it's full of air, which keeps the valves closed. You can see it's a fair bit of effort. And then what I use to knock the shims down is this really gorgeous little slide hammer that Mike at EMS made years ago. EMS doesn't actually exist as, well, not as Mike anymore. He sold the business to LT at Desmo Times. And so the special tools he used to make like this are no longer available. So what we need to do is just beat the shim down to get it to come off the collets. And with this tool you do this. Oh, there we go, that's off. That was easy. Sometimes you can hit it for 5 minutes and eventually it'll just pop off. And the little bit that grips on top of the valve, it comes off too. So our shim is down, and now we retrieve the collets. These are titanium, so you can't use a magnet, and they need to be installed dry. It's the collets, the source of all the frustration. And the shim, you can see it's got a big hole and a taper on it. And these are in the range of sort of 4.5 to 5.2, I think, something like that. So now we're going to put the shim back in and the collets. So you need to make sure you get everything dry. It's our shim, which is 0.14 millimetres bigger. And the little titanium collets, I just brake clean them to make sure all the oil is off. They're dry. Now they won't stick to the valve because there's no oil there to hold them on, which is amazing how well a little bit of oil works. So you sort of just put them there and hope they stay there, which it didn't. We'll see if this one does. May do, yes. To pick up the collets, I usually use these. It's an easy way to retrieve them. Not being magnetic, they're quite infuriating. You drop it in, make sure you clean any oil off it again. We'll try and get this one to go in while the other one stays there. Okay, so now they're both on. If I can hold them with one finger, I'll try and pick the shim up from underneath. And I've pushed the shim off and dropped it. Put that around on the high side, it might stay there. didn't fall off completely. Oh, and the other one fell off. You can see I've got the drain holes, the oil drain holes blocked with a piece of plastic tube. I'm not sure if these collets are big enough to fall down the oil return holes, but I would not at all be surprised if they did fit. Seems like the sort of thing somebody would do. Now, to make this a bit easier, you can depressurise the cylinder, bring the piston up, and that way push the valve down, which might be an easier way to get the shim over the collets. But I do it this way just to make sure that I cannot drop anything into the cylinder. So now we need to pull the shim up over the collets. And to do that, put a little opening shim on top, and then I get the tool. This is the factory tool which I bought. I did have a couple of these from Mike at EMS, but in my experience you can see it, they've spread. They just weren't strong enough. This is the factory tool, you can see how much stronger it is. And these, I've used these, this is the third time I've done this job, and I think I've borrowed the genuine tool at least once from someone, and I went and bought this one. It was a couple $100, which is an outrageous investment for bikes I do once every 5 or 6 years. But if you haven't got the right tool, it just makes a mess of it. We poke this tool in underneath the valve. I use the shim just to protect the top of the valve. You probably could do it on top of the valve, but if you've got a shim there, it means you're not going to damage the valve. And I use 9 Newton meters. I think the spec is 8 to 10. If you use 9 and you haven't got quite enough clearance, you can go to 10, and it can make a little bit of difference. Just undo that. And there we go, shim on. And that's how you do these shims. It is absolutely infuriating. They only use this system on 749S 2004 to 2006. The 2003 749S is a normal 7mm valve stem with round collet engine. They use it on the 749Rs and the 2005-2006 999R, and that's it. So the battery in the camera went flat, so I've jumped ahead a bit while it was charging up. One thing that I always do on all these engines, but particularly these ones, if you've had fairly big valve clearances, it can lead to the seats and the valve faces getting a bit crappy at times. So what I always do is just give them a good snap, even drop the valve down, let it bang against the valve seat, just to see if that helps them clean up a bit at all. Now we'll put the cams in, check it over. All the openers were fairly good, but given that they may even move a bit with a little bit of banging and stuff, I'll check them again now. Make sure you get the right cams, VA. The numbering on these cams is 5E. That's the ID. Bit of oil. I try and keep oil, as much oil as possible, off the mating faces. I gave the caps a good clean up now because they need a good clean up at some point. I always put the end screws in first because there's dowels in there, so if you put the end ones in, you're not going to get any grease off the threads between the cap and the head face. I didn't put the opening rockers in. I get out of sync when I shoot videos sometimes. Tend to forget what I should be doing. So you can see the dowels here that go around those end bolts. Start again with opening rockers this time. Oh, these pins do just slide in. They can slide in with the typical interference at times. And they all have dots on them. The exhausts have different pins to the inlets because the valve spacing is different. So cams in again, this time with opening rockers. Realistically, the cams will only go one way anyway. If you try and put an exhaust in an inlet, it just won't work because they turn opposite directions as such, or the way they approach the rockers is opposite, I guess is the best way to describe it. Just torque these to 25 Newton meters. We'll see how we went. Do they turn? Yes, it's always a good start when they turn. And they go all the way around. You can feel if you've got too little clearance or too little combined clearance, they'll bind. Okay. Start off smallest end, 0.04mm filler gauge. My hope is that this one, which is 0.05, fits through all. It doesn't. It's a bit tight. It's a bit tight. That one's okay. That one's okay. So our two exhausts are 0.04. What I might do when I pull it apart next, I might put a bit more torque on them with the tool. I go to 10 Newton meters. It'll probably make enough difference. 0.06. That one's tight, so 0.05 on that one. 0.08. It's fine. 0.1. Okay. Didn't want that. Have to readjust this one. 0.13. Yeah, okay, so that's a 0.13. And I'll check the openers. Just last time around, this one was a bit of a firm 0.1. It's more than a firm 0.1 this time. I'll try a 0.08. It's almost, yeah. We'll call that one a 0.08. I think they can vary just from snapping the valve shut. This one was a 13. It's not a 13 this time. So it's 5 thou or 0.13. So call it a 0.1. Hopefully the exhaust will be 0.15 or 6 thou. That one's okay. That's a little bit on the tight side. That one's fine. Definitely. All the openers are probably 0.02 tighter than they were previously. It's definitely a... I might give that one a bit of a rub when I pull it out. But this one's nice. So in terms of the closers, I'll make that one tighter. It was 0.27 and now it's 0.13. So we're halfway there. It can be, as ever, a little bit inconsistent. How you measure the shims can be quite important. I'll do a little separate piece on that later. I'll pull it apart and fix. This is a little piece of aluminium rod with a 6mm thread tapped into the end of it. Just makes getting these off a bit easier. Okay, pipe. Hopefully just pop the opening rockers out. Mike at EMS made one of those tools that I showed you earlier. At one point that worked with the opening rockers in, and it slid over the opening rocker, and you used the opening rocker to push down on the end of the valve to pull the closing shim up. And that meant you didn't need to pull the side plates off to get the opening rockers out, which is where some of the aggro with doing this is. And I got one of them off him and used it once and managed to banana a couple of inlet valves. I really don't know how. They were bent. You could see the end of them just off at an angle that was quite disappointing, I must say, when I realised what I'd done, because it meant I had to pull the head off and send it away and get the valves replaced, and cost me quite a lot of money. Not that I think his tool was the issue, because I heard people who used it successfully, so it was something in the way I did it. I don't know what it was that I did wrong, but I really did it wrong. So I have not ever used that tool again. I think I might have even thrown it away just to save myself from myself. I don't know. But then I bought the big factory tool recently, specifically for this bike, to make sure I had a tool that I thought was nice and consistent. I'll just tighten these a little bit. What I should do before I get too carried away is put my oil drain filler back in, just in case. Because the last thing you want to do is drop something down there. So we'll go from 9 Newton meters to 10 Newton meters. Oops. The camera's in a bit of a precarious location on the side of the workbench, which is why it's rocking around. It's zip tied to the bike on a couple of legs of its tripod, and the third leg is floating and currently causing the aggro. So let's put a touch more on these. It's not quite as scientific as I would hope it to be when you can put a bit more load on them and make them a bit tighter, but that's how they work. So they're done. As you can see, they're flopping around because I haven't pressurised the cylinder, which I will do to pull the shims off for that one. Okay, so I'll pressurise the cylinder again, and then knock that left hand inlet apart. Sometimes after you've put them back on, they come off really nicely, and sometimes you can belt them for 5 minutes and eventually they pop off. I find the inlets tend to bounce around and it gets a bit noisy, so the earmuff's on. There we go, it's off. That was pretty easy. It really is a lovely little tool, that little slide hammer. When I got the package from Mike with that in, and I pulled it out and I just said, oh my lord, It's gorgeous. And very good at its job. Okay, we go get a bigger shim. So it had a 4.78 shim in it, and now I've got a 4.85, and I might just cut to the chase and give it 10 Newton meters to start with. Again, brake clean the collets just to make sure they're nice and dry. Okay. Get onto. Oh, didn't want to sit there. It can be infuriating. I don't think either. Am I going to sit there? No. No. To pick up the one I dropped, clean it. And then go back to it again with both of them at once. My little lifters up there. It may be a little bit easier without the gloves, but I'm not really convinced that would really make a difference. Stay there. Yeah, one of them's fallen down. It might pull up or they wedge. They are infuriating little things to deal with, these collets. Absolutely infuriating at times. And realistically, that's why every time I check one of these, they're all out of spec. I remember I had a bike come in that had just had a dealership service, and the guy was he had a few things said to him during the service that made him a bit wary of what had been done. So he brought it in and asked me to redo the service, and it had closes. I think one of them was 0.40, and I think at that point I had 40,000 Ks on it, so that was technically the fourth service it should have had to do the valve clearances. So no one had ever actually done the valve clearances. And then so at 50 it came in, and I did it then. It was actually the bike that I bent the inlet valves on. But usually when you do this, they do run quite a bit nicer at low speed. And these are also the engines that had the stalling at idle problem when they were new, which they had us change the cam timing to try and build some cylinder pressure. We actually spread the overlap, retard the inlet and advance the exhaust, which generally makes an engine perform worse, but the problem wasn't the performance, it was that they stalled. And back in those days we couldn't flash ECUs at a dealership, so the only way out of it, apart from them supplying new ECUs, because the problem realistically is they need more spark advance at idle. You put another 5 degrees in and it just stops the problem. But back then we couldn't do that, so we had to do their jump through stupid hoops method under warranty. Okay, so that one's been done. So this stuff out of the way. We'll adjust some, or change some opening shims. And then I can put the cams back in again and try it again. Let's give the left-hand inlet a bit of a rub. It was 0.10, we can get it back to 0.13, that'll be nice. As all the others, put the shim on, make sure you can spin it. The right-hand exhaust was fine. The left-hand exhaust is a bit tight. So rub that one down a little bit. Take about 0.02 off it. And this one was 0.08. Okay, so that's all our openers done. Put the rockers back in. Make sure the mating surfaces are free of oil. Cams, inlet, exhaust. Let's move the seal in a little bit. The seal location's not important when you're just putting it in to check, because it's going to come out again. And which cap goes where is defined by this little groove there. There's a groove in the cap. That's where the oil supply then goes into the cam. Across the cam, comes out at all the lobes, and it comes out on this side to lubricate it. That's how they feed the oil through the tester strata cams. Okay, so spin the cams around, make sure they turn, make sure they're not binding. Okay, so we tried to open these a little bit. 0.05, 0.05, 0.06, nah, and nah. Yep. So I'll call that a 0.05 and then a 0.06. So that extra Newton metre or so does make a little bit of difference. It's worth trying if you need to. That one's tight. .05. This one got a little bit looser. It's a 0.6, but no looser than that. This one, no, it's tighter than 0.4. So we need to do that one again. Let's check the 0.13, 0.13. Not 0.15, that's great. Hopefully our exhausts are both. Maybe from this side, it's easier. Yep, both 0.15. or 6th thou, but not 7th thou or 0.18. Okay, so the exhausts are done, and the inlet, I'm still chasing this one. I just thought I'd see what happens if you try and put the wrong cam in the wrong place, because I'm curious now if it will actually work or not. Never tried this before. You can see the lobe spacing's a little bit narrower. It's quite a bit narrower there. But pull it down. Let's see what actually happens. Out of morbid curiosity. It won't even turn, which could be that it's got way too much. No, it's got closing clearance there, obviously. It's just not going to work. So hopefully that's what happens if you do inadvertently put the wrong cam in a position. It becomes obvious. And more obvious than that is that when you put them in with the opening lobes pointing up, the closing lobes are always against the rockers. So visually it should be fairly obvious that it's wrong.